All right, greetings everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell and Company, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Managing HBCU Boards, Strategies for Effective Collaboration. And this is the first of our 2012-2013 Campbell and Company webinar series. Before we begin today's interesting presentation and discussion with our panel, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to Campbell and Company webinars. So first, just to make sure that you have the best webinar experience possible, please follow these tips. First off, close any programs other than GoToWebinars, of course, that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone rather than using your computer speakers. Please move away your cell phone from your computer. And if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoTo at 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last about 60 minutes, and you will earn 1 continuing education credit for your participation. And that is good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email from GoToWebinars that includes a web address to download your certificate, the PDF of our presentation, as well as a code to receive a complimentary registration for our next webinar. And also, we want to make this as interactive as possible, so if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please send a chat to Campbell & Company. We'll go ahead and answer them as we go through the presentation. The more interactive this can be, obviously, the more fun. So, and now I'd like to take a moment to introduce Patrick Johnson. Patrick Johnson is a senior consultant at Campbell & Company. He serves a variety of clients on the East Coast as well as the Southern region. Patrick is a graduate of Fisk University and has worked as a senior administrator for Meharry Medical College. He brings a great deal of knowledge and understanding of HBCUs and their unique individual needs. Patrick holds a certificate in plan giving from the fundraising school at Indiana University. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn over to Patrick. Patrick?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our kickoff webinar, as Sarah so graciously explained, for 2012-2013 with Campbell & Company. I would first like to give a brief background of why we're here, discussing HBCUs and strategies around HBCU boards. The first thing I'd like everyone to know is that Campbell & Company has been in business for almost 40 years in higher education or the nonprofit development marketplace, and is a known entity. And one of the areas that we specialize in is in higher education. And as we were looking around and retooling our tailored needs or the needs of clients in this space, we realized that there's a huge role for firms such as ours to play in the mid-major marketplace for higher education institutions. Mid-majors generally are defined by size of school, size of endowment, enrollment, things like that. That obviously, by definition, mid-majors, you're right in the middle. You're not too small to participate. You have goals and aspirations to expand your core mission and what it is that your institution does. And within that, there's a subset of institutions that fall within the mid-major category, and that is the HBCU. And one of the things that we discovered as we were looking at this is that HBCUs are many times in need of a lot of services that firms such as ours provide, in thought leadership, in consulting services, and board development services. So we decided that if Campbell & Company was going to be a subject matter expert in the mid-major arena in higher education, that we wanted to address specifically some needs to those potential clients, such as HBCUs. So this is a kickoff. We determined that one of the topics of discussion should be around board engagement, board development, and how to enhance your board. There is an age-old question. I won't say age-old, Bob, but I'll say at least for the last 2 decades, maybe 2.5 decades, around why are HBCUs struggling to keep up financially. Many of them struggling to keep their doors open. And some of our better HBCUs struggling to really advance their mission. They might not be struggling financially, but they're struggling to advance their mission and keep pace with their contemporaries in the higher education space. And many times, the first answer that comes back generally has been because of a either disengaged board, a dysfunctional board, but the blame always falls on the board. So it's not the only reason why this is happening, but it's kind of one of the common scapegoats. So we wanted to address today, Bob and I and Paula Banks, to discuss some of the things that lead to the perception and the reality of where boards fall short. I was reading a great article this summer by the president and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, Mr. Johnny C. Taylor. He did a great article in Diverse Issues on Higher Education about that exact phenomenon, which is lack of impact from HBCU boards and how they play a vital role in either the stagnant movement of these institutions or apathy or whatever it is. It's a great article. It starts even with the premise of choosing the right leaders to run these schools, and it ends with they're given fiduciary responsibilities and then how all these tie together. So I think it's a great article that people should take a look at and read. Go online and check it out. It's in the September issue of Diverse Issues in Higher Education that's still online. So I want to go, next slide, please. I'd like to move to the overview of today's agenda. One of the things that we're going to cover in our conversation today is kind of 4 key elements. We want to make sure that everyone here on the call understands the composition of your board. What does that look like? How effective it could be or how ineffective it is because you don't have the right mix, and understanding that. We also want to discuss and go over some key elements of what does an engaged board look like? What is proper engagement? Are your trustees doing the things that they should do? Have they been educated about the things that they should do? And have they had an open dialogue with senior leadership about what they can and cannot do? And that segues into what the clear expectations of the role of senior administrators and boards are and how they work together. And once those expectations are clearly defined and hopefully met, we can discuss some elements of what a strong coalition between trustee and administrators look like. What does that collaborative effort towards achieving an advancement of a strategic plan or mission that moves your chosen institution into the next arena. Next slide, please. One of the things before we get into this, I want to make sure that you have a chat option on the GoToWebinar here at the bottom. If you have any questions prior to the end of this where we get into our Q&A, please submit them to the chat box, and this will be a completely interactive experience. So what we want to talk about in our first bullet point is understanding the composition of your board. One of the most important things that we believe, or I believe, and experience tells us is the expectations that you might have from your board can either come clearer to you once you understand what your board looks like and what it can and cannot do. One of what I believe, Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the key components is really understanding how many alumni versus non-alumni you have on the board, and not saying that either one is right, but understanding the balance given the history and the mission of your institution. If you are an institution that is stronger and pushing more towards advancing the state of your institution to be more competitive, let's say, for example, a Hampton, a Howard, a Morehouse in that arena, obviously you probably have more non-alumni on your board, more corporate-driven trustees that bring a network that allow you to push the boundaries of what your strategic plan might be. If you don't, but that's the goal of what you're achieving, and you have heavily alumni-centered board that might not necessarily be placed in corporate positions, but they're on because they have a strong passion for the institution, you might not be maximizing that particular board seat. I think there should be a healthy balance where you have enough alumni who are there that can partner with your non-alumni to educate them on the values and the mission and the passion of what it takes to be a trustee of said school. I think that's a healthy relationship between both, because you don't want your non-alumni members to be too detached and make decisions that are too black and white and don't take into effect the passion of the industry. Also, another key element, and we'll touch on that a little more, another key element is understanding your makeup by industry. You might have a heavy corporate board, and you might be an institution that has a strong focus on business, but your board makeup necessarily doesn't have a strong point in what the strategic mission might be for your institution at that plan, or the strategic plan, not necessarily the mission. So understanding how many people do you have in the healthcare sector, how many people do you have in marketing or communications or business sector as a whole, how many people are strong community leaders, how many people, as you look to build coalitions in your community with other nonprofit organizations that help advance your overall mission, do you have enough trustees that are strong in community organizations, not necessarily on the business side? How many are strong in religious-based or faith-based organizations that would be to your advantage? Understanding that industry, the makeup by industry, can also help you set expectations of what you can, I guess, realistically believe that your board can help you, your senior administrators, your deans, et cetera. The other component of understanding that composition real quick is how many active and passive members do you have? How many people actually just show up at the 4 board meetings a year? They're active at the actual board meetings, and then you don't hear from them anymore. Well, that's not really an active member. Those are passive members. But how many trustees do you have that are in constant communication with someone at the institution about ideas and thoughts that they might have, about coming and seeing them when you're doing donor visits or something like that, stopping by their office in their city to discuss what's going on with the institution in between your board meetings, before they get the board books, so they can have a buy-in to what's going on. You need to understand how many you have, and I hope that many of you, if not all of you, have more active trustees than passive trustees. And then the final component is, of those active and passive members, which ones are high impact? Which ones are high impact and active, and which ones have the capacity to be high impact but haven't been properly engaged, and therefore they're passive members? Because you don't want to have the scale tip too far into very active members, but they're not impactful, meaning, yeah, they're engaged, they have passion, but they really don't have the impact with other organizations that you might need them to have, or the financial impact that you might want them to have. So understanding that. Next slide, please. So the question is, what does a proper engaged board look like? You know, we're all saying we want an engaged board. Do you have one? Can you identify one? Well, let's discuss some of the elements of what we think that might be. Well, one, foremost, everyone is going to say is, I want a board that's given at 100%. They're meeting their fiduciary responsibility. Yes, we all want that. And we'll discuss, how do you help them achieve that? Do they have a clear understanding of what their expectation is, whether it's a personal commitment to the institution, or whether it's a give-get policy where we need them that they might not have the wealth to give at a high impactful level, or they might not have the immediate resources to give, but you feel that they're a good member. Can they help get money to the table? And so, yes, that in that sphere makes an engaged board member if they have a financial commitment to the institution. The second most important to your left of your screen is, are they bought into your strategic vision and plan? Not just writing a check, but were they involved? Have they been involved? I know it's not their direct responsibility to shape the management and strategy of the institution, but were their voices heard? Did they have legitimate input? And when there is a strategic plan, have they bought into it to say, okay, what's my role in helping you execute this? They're looking at the president. They're looking at the VP of advancement. They're looking at the deans to say, what do you need from me to help you execute that? That's another sign of an engaged board. The other is, not as blatant, but are they sitting on the right committees on your board? Not someone who has no impact. They don't even want to be on the Buildings and Grounds Committee, but you put them on there because you needed to fill a seat. Well, that's misuse of their time, their expertise, and you can have that board member shut down on you. They might feel that they're being wasted. They might need to be on the Financial Committee or the Audit Committee, or where their strengths might lie. Outside of what they do as a professional, they might have stronger strengths on something else. Are they there? Have we helped put them there so they can feel engaged? This is you doing your part to help them feel more engaged. And the final component is, how involved are they on helping develop your existing and sitting trustees? As you bring on new trustees, are they involved in the development and orientation and acclimation of your new trustees? And then is everyone involved in a solid succession plan of moving new trustees to a better committee, to a stronger committee or multiple committees, and then prepping them to be a vice chair and eventually a board chair? You have to have a concerted effort to have a legitimate succession plan from new trustee to trustee that's rolling off, so that this board stays strong. All of these four components, in my opinion, set the stage for having an engaged board. Now, I know there are lots of other areas that each and every one of you might consider, well, I'd like my trustees to do this or do that, but these are basic elements that start the dialogue. Next slide, please. So I want to segue now into what I would consider reasonable expectations from your board relating to the two previous slides. One is, I think it's a reasonable expectation that the institution make it very clear to your trustees that their responsibilities extend beyond just basic governance, that their responsibilities are to be involved more in strategic planning and being more involved in hiring practices, selection of your new presidents, beyond just sitting on the search committee for a new institution, that everyone should have a voice in understanding what is it that we're actually looking for president, for what we're trying to do over the next decade. Not just we want the most sought-after president, but does that most sought-after president fit the role of what we're looking for in a new president? So it extends beyond that. It extends their responsibility into helping self-select the right committees for them to sit on, that they're not just going to be passive members, that when we help you select a committee, that you're going to be impactful on this committee. And these committees work hand in hand with the staff and administrators at the institution. That's where the coalition is built right then and there, well beyond the large table of governors, right? This is where the two work together, school and board, and then it moves up to the larger level. And then the expectations of why you should give and how to be successful in getting money for the institution. How you should give should be reflected in not that you just owe us a check, or they just owe you a check because they're a trustee and that's what's required of them. You should define what that expectation is. If we'd like every member to give $5,000 a year, just throwing out a number, what does that $5,000 encompass? Does it include 1,000 of that is going to go to the annual fund? We're going to use 1,000 for scholarships. Explain to your trustees as if they were donors. When you're soliciting a donor, you give them all the information in the world so they're very clear on why you're asking for their gift. What is it going to be used for? What is the most impactful way that you can use their gift? What is the way that's most passionate for them? Why do you need them to give unrestricted? We give them an overload of information to convince them or help them come to the decision that it is a right investment for them to invest in your institution. It's the right decision to invest in your institution. Well, you owe that to your board, too. It's not just their responsibility to give. It's your responsibility to educate them and make them feel comfortable of why they are going to give. They're a donor. And then lastly is that we expect them to work collaboratively, work in collaboration with the advancement department and other departments, the business school, the School of Engineering, the athletic department, the School of Medicine, the School of Dentistry. We expect you at the committee level to work hand in hand with the people that we pay on a regular basis to build a strong coalition that advances who we are. So those are clear expectations that we believe should be met, that need to be met, and that need to be articulated to your board in no uncertain terms. If you don't, I think you are failing the trustees by assuming that they should naturally roll onto a board and pick up the ball running. They have, although they might have sit on other boards, but they don't have a clear understanding of what the nature is of your particular institution and the nuances of your institution. So you owe that to them. Next slide, please. I think at this point we're going to segue to Mr. Poole, who is going to give us some of his experiences over the years working with various boards, numerous boards over the last 42 years, and both as a vice president of development at specific institutions, but also as a consultant, being hired by other institutions for Mr. Poole's expertise. By way of quick introduction, Mr. Bob Poole has been a vice president for institutional advancement at least 4 historically black colleges and universities over his career, starting back in the 70s as a former Ford Fellow, and has experienced a lot of ups and downs with our institutions and brings a wealth of knowledge. He currently is the senior vice president of institutional advancement with Meharry Medical College, who has had a tremendous last 6 or 7 years and tremendous growth, high impact in the city of Nashville, and has seen a great watershed moment for HBCUs. So with no further introduction, I'll turn it over to Bob at this point. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm glad to have everyone here this afternoon, and Patrick has covered quite a bit of ground. Let me see if I can go back now and on this slide that you have before you and kind of walk through some of the things that I think should be of particular interest to HBCU advancement offers, and really so any institution, regardless of whether HBCU is not. Let me start by talking about the board and their role and hopefully their understanding of what the advancement function is all about. The very first thing I think that boards need to understand is that the advancement function of an institution is integral to advancing the whole institution. It's not just about raising money, it's about brand awareness and brand accountability and building brand. It's about accountability, it's about stewardship of resources, and all those things, they help to make a good institution great and also help those institutions to move to new agendas and new thresholds of their existence. One of the things that I think oftentimes my experience has been with boards at HBCUs, they come to the board table, as Patrick mentioned earlier, many of them have been recruited to do a number of things, most of which, unfortunately, I believe, at least in my experience, were not recruited to raise money. Or if they were, they really did not have a real sense of what that meant or how they would be integrated into the process. So the first thing I think is very important that we do as development officers, advancement team members, is to educate our board. They need to understand our business. Most do not. They need to know why we do what we do and how we go about doing it. So there's a training and educational process that must go on with every board member that becomes a board. Some are more experienced and know that intuitively and from experience, but most, from my experience again, just do not have that background. The other thing I think that's important for our boards in particular, and really any institution, is to understand your institution. What is the realistic level of fundraising and advancement productivity that one should expect of that institution? A lot of institutions and boards are famous for this, will look at what other institutions are doing and say, wow, we should do that too. School X is have a campaign for $200 million. Wow, well, we're down the road, we should have one for $200 million or $150 million, without any real sense of what goes into making that a reality. And also, why do you need it? And how would you convince people that you would know how to use those funds wisely? And how would you be able to make it happen in terms of the fundraising paradigm? So one of the things is, what is the board's sense and the president's sense or the chief executive officer's sense of what it is that you need as an institution? Does your board really understand that? And then what is their role? We talked earlier about giving and getting, and that's a time-worn phrase, and everybody understands what that means. But what does that really mean for your board? If you have a board of 30 people, and let's say only 5 of them really have any real financial capacity that can really advance your agenda, what do you really do about that? How do you make that board more effective in the fundraising arena if that's the case? And I think that the first thing is we have to be very honest with ourselves and with our boards about where we are as an institution and where we are as a board. There's nothing wrong with having people on the board necessarily, because they are who they are. Most boards are self-perpetuating, so you may not be able to change them overnight. But if you don't know where you are, you're not going to get very far with that board, because many people will be embarrassed because they can't give a lot of money. Many people will be embarrassed because they don't know or have the contacts that are needed to mount, say, a successful, comprehensive campaign. Those are realities that we have to face, and we have to develop strategies to deal with those realities. Part of the way you do that is having a realistic assessment up front. If you don't know where you are, believe me, you aren't going to get very far. So the first thing I think that boards need to come to grips with is, Patrick mentioned the recruiting side. Okay, you've got to recruit the right people. It's not going to be done overnight. So if you have a board of 30 people and really, let's say 10 of them have decent financial capacity, what do you do with the other 20? Well, first you have to have a strategy. It may well be that because of the term limits that they have, and it may take you 5 years or more to retool the board and reorganize the board based on what the board is willing to do to kind of give up the throne, if you will. A lot of boards are resistant to change, just like most people are. So you've got to be able to show them what's in the best interest of the institution. And I think one of the ways you do that is when you recruit new board members, you're very clear about what it is you would have them do. What you have, if we talk about giving and getting, what does that really mean? If you're a minister on a board and you don't make a lot of money, that may mean you giving $1,000 a year, which is okay. It may be $84 a month. But board members have to feel comfortable with that level or whatever level it is. Some other board members, we've gone to board members on our board and other boards I've been associated with in my experience where we didn't have a lot of people that could give money, but we went to the ones who could and we said, look, here's a realistic assessment of our board, excuse me, and I show them basically. If the goal is to raise $500,000 a year from the board, let's say, for some schools that might be a real stretch. For other schools, that's not a lot of money. But let's say that you're somewhere in the middle and you got to raise, $250,000 a year from your board. And for those of you where that seems like a paltry sum, forgive me, we can just scale it up to whatever level is appropriate for your institution. So most board members don't know how to do that. Many have this kind of community chest orientation where if you got 30 members, you got a goal of 500,000 divided by 30. They don't understand the gift pyramid. They don't understand that you're going to get 10% of your donors are going to be responsible for 6 to 8% of your money. How do they learn that? We have to teach them that. It's our responsibility as development officers to show them how it's done. So again, this whole assessment of what's realistic is a very important first step. The other basic step I think Patrick also talked about was, is there buy-in? Are the board members have they really come to the board with an agenda for advancing the institution, or are they on the board because it looks good on their resume, or because they have friends on the board, or because they can get to come to all the alumni functions and be recognized? What is their motivation, first of all, for being on the board? And I think what we have to do in our recruiting process is to retool our orientation for those members and let them know that there's a real fiduciary responsibility and a real role for them as board members, and it's a very serious role. It's not just so you can come to homecoming and be recognized as a board member. While that's nice and that's important, in some places, but really you're there because as a trustee, you have that institution in trust. You're the one that has that responsibility legally and morally to guide the institution and develop policies that will advance the school. So they need to understand what is the real case for support for that institution. Are they really bought into the agenda of the president and executive team? Does the board participate in that, or is it just a rubber stamp situation? If that is the case, then you aren't going to get very many board members to do a lot for you in terms of fundraising or anything else. We talk about HBCU board experience in setting goals. Well, how do you set a goal for fundraising with a board? How do you go to the board and the president says to the board, look, we need to raise this year, we have an emergency situation, we've got to raise an extra $500,000 this year. Forget capital campaigns for a moment. Let's just talk about annual giving. We'll get back to a capital comprehensive campaign scenario. But let's just say that this year something has gone badly for the school. The financial aid numbers didn't come in, enrollment numbers didn't come in as they should have, and our operating budget is facing a $500,000 deficit that the president wants to be made up in part or maybe it's all or wholly by fundraising. Well, let's say your annual fund is only raising $1 million. We need to raise $1.5 million to help bridge this gap. Well, how does one go about that with the board? First of all, does the board say, well, that's the president's responsibility and the VP's responsibility, and I have no role? What the board has to understand is that in terms of setting goals and having expectations for raising money, they have a very important role to make that happen. That budget they adopted that budget based on data about income and expenses. Well, it's their responsibility as a board to make sure that occurs, that the budget is balanced. And if there's a fundraising goal set for the entire world to participate in giving to the institution, the board should be the first one to step up. And whether that's 10% or 5% or 25%.
Bob, let me ask you a question. Has it been your experience that it's easier to get that when you put in the effort as the VP of going around and visiting with your board and them getting to know you and in more casual settings understanding the impact of what their commitment is? Has that been easier as opposed to kind of a mandated board meetings and kind of like that? You know?
It is. I don't know if it's easy, but it's more effective to go about with each as an individual to be a participant at whatever level they can. And I think that you raise a good point, Patrick, because one of the things that, some of our experiences in Meharry, we had a goal, a challenge grant, for example, and everybody looked at it and said, oh, yeah, we can do it. And everybody signed off and raised their hand at the big meeting, and said, oh, yeah, we'll do that. And, of course, no one really understood what that meant personally, or at least they didn't take it on, until we went around to key members of that board and showed them the pathway to getting to that goal. And what we had to tell the ones that we went to initially were the top donors, of course, and we said, look, here's the goal that you have to reach. And the first person we went to was who we thought would be the top donor. And we said, look, we need you to basically give 10% of that goal, or want you to consider giving that. And he automatically replied, yes, absolutely, I think that's where I should be. And we went down to others who were similarly situated and basically got half of the money committed by the top 6 or 7 members of the board. Now, what did that do? That made it much easier then to go to the remaining members. And I think that oftentimes we get caught in the trap of trying to divide a goal equally by members. And, of course, all of you, I'm sure, who've been doing this for a while, know that doesn't necessarily work. So you have to go to the people that can really make the campaign move on the front end, the top 1 to 5 to 10% of people on that board that really have to have that buy-in. That does a couple things. That gives the other people confidence, first of all, that the goal is actually realistic and achievable. It also lets people know that somebody's working, that people care enough. Now, it also lets everybody know that, wow, I can be a participant at a level that's commensurate with my ability to pay or to give, and nobody's embarrassed by that. Everybody can feel good about being a participant at whatever level they fall. And I think we have on our board levels from everyone. We have student members on our board, so representatives, or faculty members that maybe can't give a lot, but can they give $100? Yeah. Can they give? Some can give 1,000, payroll deduction or whatever. So yes, Patrick, that's a good observation. We have to go and show these people, show the board members how you do it. They don't necessarily know it intuitively or have not had the experience to do it. Very few have, I've found, so we have to show them how to do it. The whole thing that's important, as you look at the slide here about term limits, communication, and committees, Patrick talked about that earlier. Are the people on your development committee, as an example, the right people? Are they interested in fundraising? Are they interested in asking others? Are they interested in marketing the institution? Do they understand the institution? Can they articulate the case for support? Do they understand the case for support? Are they comfortable with going out to other people and saying, hey, this is a great place, let me tell you why you should consider being invested? If those are not the kind of questions you're getting, if those are not the kind of people on that committee, you probably have the wrong people on that committee, because everyone can comment and tell you what's wrong and why we can't raise money. You'll have board members who come and tell me, well, why don't you just go ask Oprah for $10 million? Or they'll read an article in the paper and say, you know, this person out in Utah gave a school $100 million. Why don't you write him or call him and ask them to do that for our institution? Well, what you have to do is sit down and really explain to individuals how this works. Otherwise, they will maybe be negative, or maybe they'll be not believing that you know what you're doing.
And I'm sorry, Bob, to interrupt you, but
No,
you also want to explain, and this is part of a larger dialogue more than today, but that the reason why those impactful or transformative gifts that happen, they don't happen in a silo, and it's not about asking. It's also about, and the board is a part of this, making the right decisions of where the institution is going. Are you expanding your research enterprise? Are you expanding the top tier level of students that you're recruiting? Has your business school began to partner and do social entrepreneurship with other organizations in your given city, that those coalitions make it attractive to big donors? Those are lots of decisions that are made that the board is involved in before the request for financial support from other resources. That's also a part of it, is making those kind of decisions and pushing the institution to show that we're worth that kind of investment beyond that. And a lot of times they don't know that.
You're right, they don't know. And it's our job to tell them, to educate them and inform them about what they don't know. And because, of course, most of our board members are very busy. They come to, that leads me to the point Patrick made earlier. You know, if we don't communicate with people, visit people in between board meetings, they're not going to be very effective. I mean, if they only come 3-4 times a year and sit in a couple hours meeting here and there for a committee, and you expect them to be effective and productive, I think you're fooling yourself when you say that, when you think that, because they can't be, because they don't have enough information to really work on your behalf. So I think that one of the things that we have to make sure we do, even if we only start with 5 or 10 people, I know everybody's busy and it's hard to get to everyone if you've got a large board, but pick your targets. Are there 3 people on this board, on your board, that I really need to sit down and have a conversation with over the next month, or 10 people, whatever the number may be, because you've got to get that buy-in. You need those advocates on the board that will come to your aid in these big meetings to say, look, wait a minute, the advancement people really you know, need some help, and let me show you how they're helping me and how we can do this. Let me move to another thing, just quick. I know we got around time. I want to give people time to ask questions. In terms of internal assessments, be true, be truthful. Really understand who you are, what your institution is doing, who is really on your board. You know, if you don't do rating sessions or evaluation sessions or qualifying meetings with your board members, you're missing the boat, because more than likely you will uncover things that you don't know about them that are going to be very helpful, either in terms of their ability to be a donor or a larger donor, or they're going to know some people that you never knew they knew until you ask them. If you aren't using analytical tools to look at wealth screening and that kind of thing, you're also missing the boat if you haven't done that for your entire board, because they're important constituency that must be evaluated, just like any other constituent group, alumni or faculty or friends or corporations. So having these rating sessions and qualifying visits and discussions, including your board members, and believe me, you can have these very deep conversations with board members one-on-one. Once you build that relationship, they're going to be useful to you. People will tell you things if they understand that you're trying to learn for the right reasons. You aren't trying to be nosy about their personal affairs. But if you begin to have some conversations and there's a trust built up, because they know that you're there for a reason, that you're there to try to advance the school. So you've got to be able to have those conversations and build those relationships. Another thing is that for our schools, oftentimes, it may be that we need non-traditional philanthropic models, perhaps in terms of our fundraising goals, because, you know, again, you know, the school down the road that's a multi-billion-dollar institution that has a billion-dollar campaign, well, it may not be realistic for my 500-member student body school to think about a $1 billion campaign today. However, are there some other models that we can use? Yes, there are. One of the things that we have to do is to say, okay, if I have a goal of $50 million, perhaps I can't raise $50 million today, but can I raise enough money to get a project done? For example, let's say that you got a $100 million goal and $20 million of that's to raise money for facilities. Well, you may get into that campaign and find out you can't get that lead gift, you can't get that, that old formula of 25 to 40% before you announce and all that. That's great. Wonderful theory, doesn't always work. Yeah, we should all aspire to that. But can you carve out a piece of that campaign? For example, maybe it's a $5 million building you can get done in 2 years. That gives your donor base a lot of confidence that you're moving, and your board, that you can really make things happen. Nothing beats success like seeing a crane building a building with a hole in the ground. People drive by and say, oh, wow, something is really going on here. So I think that sometimes we have to dissect these campaigns. What do we really need to do right now the most that's going to advance this institution the most? Can we do something short term? Maybe it's not a capital comprehensive campaign. Maybe it's what I call a capital solicitation program, where we solicit for capital needs that we have that are immediate and urgent and non-deferrable. But let's go on and get that done now to build confidence in the donor base that we know what we're doing and we have success. Success breeds success. Again, volunteer training, people have to know what to do. They don't know how to do this by themselves. It's our job to teach them that. Let them be critical. One of the things, everybody wants to do a case for support for a campaign. I say, well, when I say that, what board members often mean is they want to see a slick 30-page brochure with pictures and all that. And I'm saying to them, no, not yet. Let me show you this double-spaced 10-page document and go through it and give me feedback. I need that. Is this doable?
That's engaged.
Is it feasible?
That's
who are the donors that are going to be most interested in this aspect of this engagement you need? Yeah. Then you come back and you do all the slick stuff with the pictures and all that. But by that time, you've got buy-in. And then you have some people saying, oh, yeah, I want to be invested in that. Right. But then, of course, the other thing about the case is you use that as a qualifying tool. Well, would you, Mrs. Jones, be interested in some aspect of this program? Endowing a scholarship program in memory of your late husband. Oh, yeah, well, maybe I'll think about that, or a building, or whatever it may be. But get them involved on the front end, let them dream with you, and help build the case themselves.
Bob, thank you. Thank you so much. I know we're running short on time, so with final thoughts, what I'd like to say is I hope that each and every one of you today was able to walk away with some idea of a possible next step to help jumpstart proper board engagement or evaluation of your board and where you sit in relation with your board, what you can do as an institution to initiate that, or what you can do to help your president identify conversations he might want to have or she might want to have with the board chair or the executive committee on the board to discuss better involvement, better engagement. I hope this webinar today spurred those thoughts and ideas for you guys. And I want everyone to look forward to our next webinar. Also follow our higher education blog on our website. We're constantly posting thought and idea from many industry leaders such as Mr. Poole here on our blogs, both pertinent to HBCUs and to other institutions of higher education. I hope that you will see us as a thought leader in this industry that you can come to for those solutions. At this point, I want to turn it over to Ms. Sarah Barnes to take us from here.
Yeah, Patrick, I did have a question from the audience, and the question is there a magic number of board members depending on the size of your organization?
I'll defer that to you, Bob.
I don't think there's a magic number. Some boards are the numbers prescribed by their bylaws and so on. But I think an effective group, really, I think 20 or less to me is most effective. I think when it gets to be 30 and 40 people, it's hard to manage. And everybody, kind of gives the responsibility to other people and don't take personal responsibility all the time. So I think a smaller number of people is better. And of course, that varies all over the place. Sometimes you can't control that, but I really think of, 20 to 25, I think is optimal.
Okay. I have another question. We have a couple of actually really good questions here. Can you give your impression on job description for board members, charters, just going into more depth on that?
Well, first of all, I think you should have one. You should have job descriptions for boards, written job descriptions, and usually that's through a trustee and governance committee or something like that. I think that's very, very important, because if you don't tell people what the expectations are, they really don't know they're not going to do very much or not do what you need them to do. So yes, I think there should be written, clearly stated goals and objectives and requirements, and really a job description for board membership.
And done in an orientation process.
And done in an orientation process. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think the orientation process, one of the things that we really need to do more of is to have new board members coming on and be paired with a mentor board member, or someone that can guide them and educate them and help them navigate through the board and the institution. If you're a new person, never been involved with an institution, for example, it's very, it's kind of, it can be put off a bit. If you come to a meeting, nobody really reaches out to you and really gives you instructions. There's a formal orientation process, but there's also the more informal, let me be your partner, member, mentor.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial, because if you do that strategically, it definitely welcomes the new board member. They're allowed to ask questions that they might feel is a dumb question to their mentor. They're allowed to disclose shortcomings might be as a board, and they'll ask more questions. And that's what you want. You want to be able to pull out the best out of your chosen new trustee. And stating the expectations clear is great, but a proper orientation and a proper mentoring role where you can be candid with someone who's going to help you develop as a strong trustee, you'll maximize that at that point.
Okay, great. Another question we have is, how often would you do retreats with your boards? Annually, every 2 years? What about formal orientation?
Well, I think we touched on the formal orientation just now. I think that the standard operating procedure is what, every 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think retreats are wonderful. I think they should be done periodically. At least I would say yes, every other year or so, because you have new people coming on. And the board needs to get away with its members to kind of retool and reassess where they are, away from just the regular business. So I think that's very effective. I would say at least every 3 years for sure.
I'd like to add a caveat to that, is, and I'm speaking specifically to HBCUs, what I would suggest is that beyond board retreats, that your development office and your senior administrators, your presidents, your deans, take the time over the course of a year to go and visit with key members of your board. Let them get to know who you are. Have very casual dialogue. Let them know about your dreams and aspirations in a particular, your business school or your engineering school, a campaign that you might be looking at, or let them tell you about a campaign they'd love to kick off. That does a lot better than a retreat, because it's a one-on-one in their environment. Everyone's relaxed. That's important. I think that should be a component, especially in HBCU.
The other thing about retreats is making sure that there's a clear agenda for that, and what's the expectation, what's the deliverable that you really want from that retreat. It may be, one retreat may be dedicated to just building better relationships among members, or it may be around fundraising, or it may be new academic programs. But I think you should have a focus rather than just making it another meeting, such that the board comes away feeling they really achieved something and have advanced their own agenda as a body, so that they can be more effective in their service.
Right. I'll add this final component, and Sarah, you can ask the next question. But I'd like everyone to remember that when you're dealing with HBCUs, our institutions, there is no cookie-cutter approach. I know many institutions have been fed cookie-cutter approaches over the last couple of decades. But what works for Hampton does not work for FAMU. What works for Morehouse does not work for Fisk University. We have to look at each of us as an individual institution and be willing to be flexible and to do things outside of the norm to make sure that we get the most out of our administration and our board. Don't be afraid to try things that are new. It's almost like working for a startup.
Great. Another question I have is, what strategies do you have for engaging non-alumni on your board?
Well, one of the things is to, first of all, simply put, engage them. Go sit down and talk with them. Make them feel comfortable and feel a part of the family. For example, we have here some new members that are not alumni, are not from Nashville, that have recently joined our board, and we've made an effort, the president, myself, and some others, members of the board, have gone to visit them in their offices, in their homes, to really give them a really one-on-one orientation, if you will, to the institution, the history, the mission, the goals and objectives, our successes, our challenges, all of that. So they can get a real good feel. So when they come to that first meeting or the second meeting, they're very comfortable and well-versed in our business model, and what we're trying to do as an institution. If you don't do that, people aren't going to get in there and raise their hand and ask a lot of questions. But if you really prep them well in advance to that first meeting or that first couple of meetings, they're going to feel very engaged and feel a part of the family right away.
And I'd like to add to that quickly is that's where partnering works with your orientation, the mentee-mentor relationship. Partner your non-alumni with your alumni members. It does two things. It brings your non-alumni into the fold. Secondly, what it does is it breaks up the unintended alumni cliques. You don't have the alumni all grouping together at every board meeting. You force dialogue and cohesion, or you force the attempt at it.
That's very important because sometimes some members will not feel comfortable in challenging ideas at the meeting because they see this group of alumni posing them, and maybe they're correct, but oftentimes they're not. And members may be reticent to say anything. But if they're comfortable in what we've been prepping them on and they understand that the data that they've been given, they're more likely to ask the right kinds of questions. And you need that other views. You need outside views. You don't need everybody to be, having the same monolithic kind of approach to things.
Okay.
Any more questions?
That wraps up all of our questions for today. There's some really good ones. So I want to thank everybody who joined us today, and a special to both of you for contributing all of your thoughts and insights to the audience. I did want to share with you an upcoming webinar that you all might be interested in on December 5th. We're partnering with Target Analytics for statistical trends in annual giving, a focus on annual giving habits. This is complimentary, and you can go ahead and register on our website at campbellcompany.com. And that's all we have today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you guys next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you all for participating.
Okay. Take care. Bye.